Wrocław is a city in southwest Poland, situated along the Oder River, with a turbulent history reaching well into the early medieval era. Its historical role as sort of a microcosm between various different cultures and ethnicities is well reflected in its architecture. Around the Old Market Square, which is one of the largest in Europe by the way, you can find a row of beautifully ornamented houses in various colours. In its centre there is a magnificent town hall which was built in the 13th century, but received its Gothic facade in the 19th century. To the north of the old town you can find Cathedral Island, which is not really an island, but still, as the name might suggest, offers a number of beautiful churches. My absolute favourite building in Wrocław, however, is the National Museum, which is completely covered in ivy, which turns colourful in autumn and thus makes for some fantastic photos. As you walk through the city, however, and enjoy its beauty, you might notice something strange. Around pretty much every corner you can find small bronze statues of dwarfs, each about 30 centimeters tall, engaging in various activities. This one's a coffee lover, this one is riding a pigeon, this bloke is casually withdrawing his money, this one likes croissants, this one's enjoying a beer, but with a dog, this one's watching something on his laptop. In total there are over 800 of these fellas in Wrocław, and trying to find them all has become a favourite among tourists. There is an app which you can install that will lead you to all the dwarfs and will give you information about each and every one of them. This of course begs the question, why though? What do they mean? Is it just for fun, or are there more serious reasons behind it? Well, it turns out it's actually quite a bit of both. They are an homage to a satirical protest movement which sprung up during the 1980s to protest against the oppressive socialist regime. This video will be all about this strange movement, which used very weird and absurd methods to protest against injustice and deplorable living conditions. Before we move on, a very quick word from today's sponsor, CyberGhost VPN. Using the free public Wi-Fi provided on trains and in some cafes might be very tempting, but can very quickly become a huge risk. Data breaches and malware infections could just be one click away from making you lose important data. But don't worry, because this won't happen to you with CyberGhost VPN. With CyberGhost, your data is routed through an encrypted VPN tunnel, and encrypted in this way. Your IP address is also hidden, making you even more anonymous on the internet. It has over 11,000 servers in 100 countries you can connect to within just a few seconds. This allows you to access content that might be locked in your country, be it on Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney+, whatever you wish. CyberGhost VPN is available for all platforms: Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, Smart TV, and even gaming consoles. With one single subscription you can protect up to 7 devices, something your friends and family will definitely appreciate. CyberGhost has over 38 million users worldwide and an excellent rating on Trustpilot. There's also 24/7 customer support in case you run into any issues. If this sounds like something for you, click on the first link in my description, where you can get CyberGhost for just $2.03 per month and an extra 4 months for free, which is just an amazing deal, honestly. Don't worry about trying it out, because there is a 40-day money-back guarantee, so it's totally risk-free. Start protecting yourself today. In order to better understand the silly dwarf movement, I think it's important to quickly talk about the political situation in Poland in the early 1980s. When 1980 rolled along, Poland had been financially struggling. It had a huge amount of foreign debt, the inflation was skyrocketing, and the economy was in a recession. When the government raised the price of meat, which had been heavily subsidized, strikes broke out in the city of Lublin and quickly spread to other Polish cities, especially along the Baltic coast. The workers were demanding higher wages to combat the rising cost of living. In August, the workers of the Lenin Wharf in Gdańsk went on strike, and shortly after, an inter-company strike committee was founded under the leadership of Lech Wałęsa. Increasingly, political demands were also made, such as the extension of press freedom, the right to strike, the release of political prisoners, and the right of establishing free trade unions. And unlike in 1956, 1970 and 1977, the regime decided not to respond to the protests with violence, but to start negotiations. And so, Vice Prime Minister Mieczysław Jagielski and Lech Wałęsa signed the Gdańsk Agreement on the 31st of August, in which the government agreed to most of the strikers' demands. Over the following months, this process was repeated in many Polish cities, where workers striked in order to gain better working conditions and political rights. In September, the trade union Solidarność was founded, and it was reluctantly recognized as such by the Supreme Court in Warsaw a few months later. Over the course of the following year, the ruling Polish United Workers' Party lost around 10% of their members, many of whom joined Solidarność instead. By summer of 1981, Solidarność had almost 10 million members, and its influence was growing. It was much more than just a trade union, but also an anti-communist protest organization which united various political groups and ideas. At its core, it didn't want to overthrow the state necessarily, but instead decide to reform it into a more humanitarian, lawful and efficient system. With the new liberties that had been granted to the newspapers, the government and the economic system suddenly found themselves under a lot of public criticism. The Polish United Workers' Party no longer held a monopoly over the spread of information, and it noticed that the tide was slowly turning against them, as the Polish people wanted things to change drastically. There were some hardliners in the Polish government who wanted to crack down on the Solidarność movement. One of them was the Minister of Defense, Wojciech Jaruzelski, who had also become the minister-president and the party leader in 1981. He was much less willing to compromise than his predecessor. Under pressure from the Soviet Union, Jaruzelski imposed martial law on the 13th of December 1981. The Solidarność got suspended, certain liberties such as the right to strike, to assemble and to move wherever you want were abolished, and military personnel roamed the streets. In many cities, violent clashes erupted between armed forces of the state and striking workers who wished to preserve their rights. Vocal critics were often brought before military courts, and until the end of martial law in 1983, about 12,000 people were sentenced to some sort of punishment. The government opposition once again moved underground, and Jaruzelski seems to have won. The back of the Solidarność organization had been broken, and the government had regained its former power. For now, at least. In the 1980s, Wrocław had been one of the most powerful centers of resistance against state oppression. The city saw numerous strikes and demonstrations, one of which even developed into an open street battle against Riot militia forces in 1982. It was in this city that a young art history student called Waldemar Friedrich began his Orange Alternative movement. You see, during the time of martial law, many people painted anti-government slogans on house walls, such as Solidarność lives on. Soon after, these slogans were simply painted over by the government, leaving behind visible stains. On these stains, Waldemar Friedrich and a few sympathizers drew sketches of dwarfs. This idea was quite frankly absurd, but that was the whole point. It made fun of authoritarianism and the socialist state in their very own way. Whenever Friedrich got arrested for painting those dwarfs, which happened quite a few times, the authorities would make themselves a laughingstock. When he got apprehended in the coastal town of Świnoujście, Friedrich had to sign a declaration stating that the dwarfs were of unpolitical nature. In the following years, the Orange Alternative movement would take to the streets and become a mass phenomenon. At that time, members of the armed militia, who had often cracked down on protests during the time of martial law, were still sporadically patrolling the streets, and as such, mass gatherings in public were always going to be highly risky. And so, the Orange Alternative decided to organize protests and demonstrations that were so absurd and strange that the patrolling officers often didn't know how to react. For example, on the 1st of June 1987, it was International Children's Day, dozens of students from the university put on dwarf hats and began to hand out sweets and other dwarf hats to passers-by on Świdnicka Street, encouraging them to partake in the gathering. The militia responded to this by mass arresting the participants, claiming that they were somehow disrupting the public order. Over the next few months, similar so-called happenings occurred in the city. In October 1987, the Orange Alternative handed out single sheets of toilet paper on Świdnicka Street, thus making fun of the lack of fundamental consumer goods in the country. In March of the following year, on International Women's Day, they attempted to do the same with menstrual pads. For this, Waldemar Friedrich was sentenced for 3 months in prison, allegedly because he was disturbing public order. When the 70-year anniversary of the Russian October Revolution came along, the Orange Alternative had planned something special. You see, the anniversary was usually one of the most important public holidays in many socialist countries, and huge celebrations were organized. Prominent party leaders would often hold speeches, and the successes of the socialist economy were praised. However, these celebrations were usually closed off from the public, and so the group decided to plan their own celebration. Using anonymous flyers, they invited hundreds of Wrocławians who all showed up dressed in red or equipped with red accessories of sorts. The flyer had read, "Comrade, please dress ceremoniously in the color red. Wear red shoes, a red hat, and a red scarf. If you don't possess a red bracelet or any other red element of clothing, ask your neighbor for a red bag. If you don't own a red flag, paint your fingernails in red. If you really, truly don't own anything red, you may want to purchase a baguette with ketchup." Their plan was to go to a local bar and to eat red borscht soup to celebrate the October Revolution. The authorities got wind of this plan and blocked off the streets. When the celebrators arrived, the militia ordered them to take off all their red clothing and accessories and arrested everyone who failed to comply. Again, this made the authorities look like absolute buffoons for arresting people whose only crime was that they had been wearing the color red. The orange alternative became hugely popular among the people of Wrocław. It offered people the opportunity to become politically active while having fun and without the need of committing to a certain organization or ideology. Anyone could just join their protests whenever they wanted. It helped people overcome the fear of authority, which they had acquired during the times of martial law by publicly ridiculing the political system. The popularity of this strange group only grew and grew as time went on, and found supporters among all backgrounds, occupations and ages. The Orange Alternative would organize dozens of these strange street happenings all over Poland and even gained imitators in other Polish cities such as Warsaw and Łódź. Eventually, the socialist regime came to an end and Poland became a democracy. The Orange Alternative movement pretty much slipped into irrelevance for a decade, until the city decided to place a bronze statue of a large dwarf on Świdnicka Street called Papa Dwarf as a neat little memorial dedicated to this strange movement. A few years later, a local sculptor called Tomasz Moczek had the idea of creating tiny bronze dwarfs, each representing a singular aspect of Wrocław city life. The city mayor loved this idea and commissioned 5 of these small dwarfs from the artist. After a while, more and more dwarfs were set up all over the city, and by 2017, Moczek had created over 100 of these little fellas. Several other artists have also joined in on the fun, and Wrocław keeps receiving new dwarfs every single year. The dwarf has also become a mascot of the city and is often used for advertisement purposes. There are even some dwarfs abroad. As a symbol of partnership, Wrocław gifted its sister city Dresden 2 dwarfs, and Berlin has also received one lately. In Lithuania you can find these statues in Vilnius and Kaunas. Inspired by Wrocław, the town of Hitzacker along the river Elbe has also begun to put dwarfs along its streets. So should you ever find yourself in Wrocław, and you should definitely go there, you will know what the countless dwarfs stand for and can boast about it to whomever you want to impress for whatever reason. Anyway, that's all for today. As always, a big dankeschön for watching, and I hope you liked the video and learned something useful. If you did, a like and a subscribe would be much appreciated. I would like to give a huge and heartfelt shout out to my kind supporters over on Ko-Fi. A Cup of Tea, Tristan Kriegsmann, Ryan Layton, Philipp Marchewka, Marius Gerling, the Grand Duke of Sealand, Luca Drohle, Wienweh and Nico. You are absolutely phenomenal. Have a very nice day and see you next time. Don't forget to click on the description link to get the special discount CyberGhost VPN is granting to my viewers. This application will protect your data while you browse and give you full access to all blocked content on the internet for $2.03 a month only. Totally risk-free, so check it out. Link in the description.